All right, psychology nerds, and welcome to another episode of Psychology and Stuff, the podcast out of Phoenix Studios at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay. I'm Ryan Martin, one of the hosts of Psychology and Stuff, and I'm here, as always, with my co-host. She is the chair of the UW Green Bay Psychology Program, an environmental psychologist and statistician, my chum, my buddy, my pal, my dear friend, Dr. Georjeanna Wilson-Dunges. How's it going, G?
It is going great. I thought we got rid of the chum.
Yeah.
I thought
Nope.
that we decided that, but we didn't.
Yeah, I actually I decided to lean into it more, as you as you might have noticed. In fact, not only that, but here's what I've done since our last episode. I went and I looked up synonyms today for friend, to see what some alternatives were, what some options were. You know, I'm gonna be honest, there's a lot here that I don't like very much, that I don't think we should use, but I'm still gonna share them with you. So are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. You could be my companion, which
No,
yep, it sounds like
no.
we're dating. You could be my boon companion, which is probably something I should know but don't. You could be my best
Okay.
friend, which is fine. My intimate. Uh,
No,
these are
nope.
okay. I think we get into some better ones here. So my confidant, my alter ego, my soulmate,
No.
my shadow, uh, my okay. My playmate or my playfellow, my workmate, my ally, my comrade, my associate, my sister, my pal, my buddy, my chum, my spar, my sidekick, my cully.
Your
I'm
what?
worried some of these are inappropriate. My crony, my my
Wow.
bezzy. Yeah.
Wow.
Ooh,
Suddenly,
mucker.
like, chum sounds great. I think we should go with that.
How
Like,
about
what?
mucker? Is mucker
What
seem
is
like an option we can use?
No, that sounds like a fish that is resides at the bottom of the ocean.
No, you're right. That does sound like that. Okay. Well,
Yeah,
yeah, I think we got a lot of options.
yeah.
Uh,
I would like you to like swap out chum every once in a while just to surprise me.
okay.
Um,
Like
but
I
maybe
could
not like the intimate one. Yeah, like I don't think I want to go there.
okay.
And until we figure out what a mucker is, like don't
We
call
should
me that.
avoid that one too. Okay. Well, there's amiga, compadre, paisan, homie, bro, homegirl,
Homegirl. I kind of like
sis.
that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we've got a lot of options here that I like. How have you been, G?
I have been great. We are recording this at the end of Psych Week for UWGB Psychology. So it's been a really exciting week where our students have just been shining stars. So it's been great.
Yeah, I've been super, super, super jazzed about all of that. We had the Psychi induction on Tuesday, which was really great. What sounds like in total we had like 40 new inductees,
Yep.
40 plus maybe, but then that night there were like 20 plus who actually walked the stage, which was cool. It's always super fun to see them do that, see their parents there so proud and other family there so proud, which is rad.
Yep.
And then last night we had the Sci Talks. You want to talk about the Sci Talks?
Yes, there were like five really engaging talks about how psychology relates to maybe their internship or job or research in a lab or other kinds of research or their life story. And it was very inspiring to hear how we live out psychology every day in the things that we do. And so they did a fabulous job. And we're actually, UWGB Psych will be promoting those in video form coming
Yes.
in a few weeks here. So maybe we can give a shout out to that when that happens later this month.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll even post them along with this on All the Rage and in other places, but absolutely check that out. Because it was a very, very cool event. Really, really good talks and a lot of fun. So people will be able to see 5, 8 or so minute talks in just I don't know, maybe about a month once they're cut down and edited and whatnot. So
Yep.
cool, cool.
Great.
All right. So here's the thing. I like doing introductions, as we know. We've talked about on the show. The introductions are fun. However, we do not have a guest today. And it's unlike past times where either you or I have sort of played the role of guest. We don't even have that.
Nope.
No guest. But I decided that we're talking about an article. And so I decided I was going to introduce the article as though it's a guest. So,
Love that.
yeah.
An article chum, we might
Yes,
say.
exactly. This article is my mucker. Um, so I don't know if I'm using that correctly. We're gonna find out after the show. So, all right, are you ready for my intro?
I'm ready.
Good. You have made. Sorry, I just started laughing right out of the gate. You may have read our guest today on March 13th in the Washington Post. Before that, though, it was an idea in an author's head that led to a great deal of research, interviews with experts, and hours of writing. Coming in at approximately 400 words and taking about 8 minutes to listen to, it's generated hundreds of comments online and been shared thousands of times on social media. Our guest today is none other than Richard Simma's Washington Post article, Science of Forgetting, Why We're Already Losing Our Pandemic Memories. Welcome to the show, article.
How are you feeling today?
Yeah.
Feeling good?
Yeah. All right. So that was fun. Why don't let's get into it, because this is, I mean, talk a little bit about what inspired this episode, G.
Absolutely. Well, I subscribe to a really great list serve called The Behavioral Scientist, and I highly recommend it. And so they share interesting thoughts and articles based on empirical research. And so this was one that I was reading about the pandemic and forgetting. And I, at the Psych-High induction earlier this week, I was giving the keynote and I gave a date for something like when Psych-High happened, and the date was completely off. And I realized that, like, I have no idea when things have happened, and like, I have no sense of time anymore because of the pandemic. And then I read this article and I was like, wow, I am not alone. That there's a whole entire science of forgetting and why we might all be sharing in sort of some of this forgetting of the small details of our day-to-day life during the last 3 years. It's like a whole big blur. So I thought it'd be really fun to talk about it.
Yeah. I love the science of memory is some of my favorite stuff to study. And I think we should be clear at the outset that neither you or I are memory experts. This isn't our field. And so neither of us are that kind of psychologist. But I think both of us have had some exposure to this, and also what we're really sharing is the information that is in this article. But I think one of the things I notice is that people's understanding of memory is oftentimes really flawed. That people tend to think of memories as operating like a recording, and that they remember things exactly as they happened, when in reality that isn't the case. We conflate things all the time. We add things, we omit things, that and that's a lot of what this article was about, but more specifically related to the pandemic and some of the things we forgot there, or yeah, some of the things we remember there, and also some things we forgot. And so I think what I wanted to do was just pull a couple of sort of quotes from it that we might be able to talk about as we go. I don't know, I think you may have done the same.
Mhm.
But I want to start out right out of the gate with what I thought was a really interesting statement, that a basic assumption that we can make is that everybody forgets everything all the time, said Norman Brown, cognitive psychology professor researching autobiographical memory at the University of Alberta. The default is forgetting. That's a that's a statement right there. Like that's a powerful statement that we need
Right.
to grab onto.
Because I feel like I always think about like excessive forgetting, like maybe it related to Alzheimer's or dementia. I always think about like that it would not be typical for a person to forget very often. But I feel like this quote tells us that forgetting is what we do all the time. And they went on in the article to explain some of the cognitive science of why that might be true, and that we when we once we encode or consolidate those memories in our brains, how we remember, like the word remember, is that we access it and then we reconsolidate it, and that's where like things happen that we forget. We trim things out, we add things in, we morph things as we every time we access a memory, we reconsolidate it,
Right.
and it turns out to be a different memory
Yeah.
altogether.
Yeah. I mean, that's what's so fascinating. I mean, and to me, there's so much interesting research around this and how that happens and how, I think about some of this article didn't go into tons of this, though a little bit, but some of what psychologists for a long time sorry about that. My Lord, I muted myself midway through what I was trying to say. Um, but I think what we see as being some of the stuff we used to think of as flashbulb memories, right? And so I don't know what your experience was with this, but when I was in graduate school, and excuse me, when I was in undergrad, we were taught flashbulb memories as though they were actual, accurate, 100%. We remembered that thing that happened. And so for listeners, if you're unfamiliar with what a flashbulb memory is, it was this concept of highly emotional events. A lot of times people would use things like um, September 11th or Challenger exploding or JFK being shot. These are all really old examples. But people would use those examples like, do you remember where you were when that happened? And at the time we were taught, no, those are accurate, right? I mean, I was taught that. And since then we know that no, we actually don't remember those things nearly as well as we think we do, and that we commit errors of both omission and I think commission, that we add things to it that are similarly untrue.
Absolutely. And I think you and I were talking about the very beginning of the pandemic.
Hmm.
And I had been thinking about like the first time that I was like learning about the pandemic, and it wasn't called a pandemic then, and it wasn't even called
Hmm.
COVID-19 then. It
Yep.
was called like the novel coronavirus. Like
Hmm.
that was the term that we were using. But I thought that I recollected and remembered the moment I figured out what was happening. Um, but then I went back and reviewed some emails that I was sending, and I was like, nope, I
Yep.
don't remember it, because how we re access those memories are like smushed together with where we are at now. Like, right,
Right.
like I am so much more knowledgeable about how it played out, and I have different emotions toward it uh, now than I did then, and it's messed with my memories, and they're not as accurate.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. I think now I'm assuming that this memory that I'm about to share is accurate, but maybe not. So maybe I shouldn't be assuming that. But here's how I remember it now. What chances are it's not how it happened. But at some point, I went back to my office for the first time in a long time during the pandemic, and I had there was a notebook that was sitting there, which was the notebook I was using around the time that everything started to shut down. and I opened it up to the dates of things, and I sort of revisited a lot of my notes from work around that time, and it was really interesting to watch about. I mean, even early March, I'm writing about upcoming plans for in-person events, things I want to do in class, in my in-person class, all sorts of things that, and then what was it? 12 days later, campus is closed and ends up being closed for the rest of the semester. And I think that was one of, like, when it comes to sort of memories I've forgotten, it was just how quickly it all happened. That was something
Yes.
that I just didn't realize.
Yes. And I think also for me at the very beginning, it got scary
Yeah.
really fast. And so I know you know a lot more than I do about like emotional memories, but I feel like the things that I remember most, or at least find myself recollecting about the most, are the most emotional kind of
Hmm.
things that happen. And how one of those emotions was fear. I was in Iowa doing like a departmental evaluation at the University of Northern
Mm.
Iowa. And the I was there the day their campus shut down. And so they sent me home. Like I had just driven there. I stayed overnight and then I got up the next morning. I went there for about 3 hours and then they're like, we can't do this anymore. You have to go home because they might close the state border.
Really?
And
Oh.
so I remember being terrified that I wouldn't be able to come home. Um, and of course, my mind went like directly to like the zombie apocalypse. Like I was thinking, like, I'm never going to be able to get back to my family and I'm going to have to stay in Iowa forever. And, and it was like scary. And I drove home. And then that next day, our campus shut down too. And I felt like it was literally the end of the world and I was so
Yeah.
scared.
Well, that's actually brings us to a really great quote from this article. What we remember tends to be distinctive, emotionally loaded, and deemed worthy of processing and reflecting upon in our heads after the event happened. Our memories are centered on our life stories and what affected us personally the most. Against that neural backdrop, the pandemic would seem unforgettable. It was a frightening historic event, the likes of which most people had never encountered before. But then it goes on to talk about it was difficult for our brains to encode the overload of information we had to sift through: masks, social distancing, super spreaders, more cases, more deaths, new waves, and new variants such as Omicron and Delta. And who even remembers all the subvariants? And that is true. I mean, that I think there's a big piece of it. Like, yes, it was emotional for a lot of us,
Mhm.
most of us, but also there was just so much coming at us that it was an emotional and memory overload.
Yes. And so that's maybe why I think the beginning was so easy to remember, like because it wasn't yet so overwhelming and it was really hard to get information at the very beginning because we didn't have it. But eventually, and I don't even know how long this took because again, like my memory is faulty. I would spend like an hour every day, like looking at graphs of like how many
Mhm.
cases and how many deaths. And there was like a map of the United States and it would color like darker color red or lighter color
Right.
red by like how many cases there were. And it would go like from the north to the south in winter and summer. And I, I was like consumed by that data kind of thing also because it was so scary to
Mhm.
me. Did you do similar things? Did you doom scroll so much
I
information?
I did a fair amount of doom scrolling. I think more my anxiety was more focused on kind of what were the best ways for us to manage our home. And so my anxiety was really driven by, like, how long could we go as a family without needing to go to the grocery store? And when we did go, what was the best way to handle that? And those are some of the things that, until I started actually reflecting on it, I hadn't really it's easy to forget kind of in the beginning we understood so little that we didn't have a sense for what was safe and what wasn't safe. And so we took what now appear to be or feel like unnecessary not provocations, what word am I looking for? Unnecessary precautions.
Precautions?
Yes, there we go. Unnecessary precautions, but at the time they felt necessary because, and so I remember things like, I mean, maybe this is TMI, but when I would come home from the grocery store, I mean, we still believed things might be on surfaces,
Yep.
and so we would bring our food inside. It would stay on the counter for a little while before we felt good putting it away. I would actually take my clothes off in the garage and leave them out there for a little while because, again, we thought it's possible that's what was going on. And then I would go take a shower. And so, again, this might seem a little to some listeners who didn't do these things, or some listeners who don't necessarily think about it that way. I think, again, at the beginning of things, we were unsure. I mean, I think in the very beginning we thought it existed on surfaces primarily, and so
Right.
that was one of the things we were being careful of.
Yeah. And I think that for me, like the thing that I don't remember well is how long did I do that? Like I wiped down my groceries,
Right.
like in my car. Like I didn't even
Yep.
bring them in the house until
Yep.
I used like
A
the
Clorox wipe.
Clorox wipes
Yep.
if you could get them. And I
Mhm.
remember going to Costco once and there was like a 3-pack and I thought I had won the lottery. I was like, "Oh my God." Like pick it up off the shelf. You could only buy one. And I thought this is like the greatest thing ever because then I could wipe down my groceries.
Hmm.
But I don't remember like when did I start doing that and when did I stop?
Right.
Like and how long
Mhm.
did I do that for? I have
Yeah.
no idea. Like 2 years of like basically like 2 years, maybe 3
Mhm.
years of my life. One of the quotes in that article is that when you have like so much information overload and another thing that we might talk about like the monotony
Mhm.
of the pandemic, that the memory sort of puts it together as almost one event.
Oh,
And
interesting.
I absolutely think about the pandemic like the pandemic. Like
Right.
it was just a single event that just happened to last for 3 years.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I can absolutely see that, and it is, and that's kind of what I mean about like, you're right. I had these practices early on. Those practices changed over the course of it, and it's easy to forget like that there was a point where where I was doing things differently than and that I shifted that. And yeah, not, I mean, yes, it was really scary, and I definitely don't want to minimize all of the loss. I know many people lost. I'm one of them who lost close family members through this. Um, and I don't want to minimize any of that. I do acknowledge that not all of my memories, though, from that time are unpleasant. That I had, there was a lot of, for me, family time that I actually sometimes find myself being nostalgic for. There were things we did that we haven't really done since in the same way. There are even some times where, I mean, I remember sometimes like some gatherings that the department would have, some virtual gatherings that were really, really fun.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What Oh, go ahead.
I agree with that. I think that I started like a video, like a vlog thing
Hmm.
called Nature and
Oh,
Chill.
I remember. Yes, I remember this now.
Where I would just record my dog just walking out in nature, rolling in the snow, listening to birds. And literally, I would post like maybe a nature and chill once a week. And so many people would just watch that and comment like how helpful it was for them,
Mhm,
how calm and peaceful it made them feel. And that is one of my most pleasant memories of the
mhm.
pandemic was just the time that I spent out in nature, and the time with my family and with the dog who now has anxiety because he
Oh,
doesn't forget that
right.
we were home 24/7.
Yep.
He definitely remembers that and wants us to go back to that.
Remind me, were your kids with you? Like, did they live at the
They
house?
So, you know, my kids were like adults, and
Mhm,
so they were with me until fall of 2020 because my mother-in-law, who was very ill, she was dying of cancer,
mhm.
came to live with us because we couldn't go and see her in
Oh,
the nursing
right.
home. And so my kids didn't were scared because they were both working out in the
Mm.
world with like customers and with other humans. They were so scared of getting her sick that they both moved out like
Oh,
at the same time to
okay.
protect her, which is also something like when people ask you like, oh, you like, are you sad to be an empty nester? And I was like, am I an empty nester? I'm like, yeah, they left, but it wasn't like the same kind of leaving.
Right.
Like they left for a really noble reason that I
Yeah.
will always like think so highly of them for making that choice. And I remember like packing them up like a ton of food and like
Mhm.
stuff to take with them in case like they couldn't go to the grocery store or something.
Right.
It
Yep.
was wild.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
yeah, so I had some time with them, like from March until September, where we were all together. My daughter was a student at UWGB. It was her first year.
Hmm.
So she was taking all of her classes next to me as I'm teaching my classes. She's taking virtual classes, and it was fun.
Yeah.
And your
Yeah.
kids were in school, or well, they still are,
Yes.
but
No.
but they were in school, virtual school, while you
Yep.
were teaching virtual school.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I actually do, their experience was not it was hard. I mean, to be clear, I don't wanna I know that it was hard for them, but it wasn't this sort of negative experience a lot of kids had. I think some of it had to do with their age. They both did really well. They both, like, had fun. They missed their friends, but they also had each other, and they're pretty close in age, so they played games, and they would do a lot of fun creative things together. They also, I think it's fair to say that a lot of ways, I'm going to say something that will sound terrible, but the degree to which technology helped get people through this, but not necessarily because they were just on screens all the time. When they were on screens, they were actually interacting with friends, like that was when we got them like Facebook Messenger accounts and things like that so that they could keep up with their friends, and they would have their own little like happy hours, and so
Yes.
there was this other couple that we would have like once a week a virtual happy hour with, who had who also have two kids approximately the same age, and so they would have their own little separate sort of virtual happy hour in another room where they would hang out and play video games online or whatever, and like stuff like that was actually pretty fun.
Yeah, I am so grateful for the technology that we have and had. We were talking about how we interviewed someone for a job like a
Hmm.
month after the pandemic happened, and so we interviewed them online, and like we were using, I think, Skype for Business or
Yeah.
something, and none of us knew what we were
Yep.
doing. We didn't know how to use it or send an invite, and like how quickly we figured all of that out. And how awesome it is now that you and I are recording this on Zoom, which then goes to YouTube, which then like it's amazing. Like the technological advances, I'm so grateful for because
Yep.
I feel like I would have been so lonely
Yep.
if I weren't able to see other people's faces.
Yeah, no, yes, absolutely agree. I mean, it is amazing, and to see how quickly people kind of figured it all out when they needed to. So
Yep.
I want to read this. This is, I think, the last. Well, maybe not. It's not the last line of the article, but something that I think is interesting. It says, remembering the past is something we do in the present with all our current emotions, knowledge, and attitudes. This reality may have direct implications for how we look back on COVID and contend with the future. And then sort of ask the question, how will COVID be part of your life story? Which I think is a really interesting question because, I mean, to me, like this article is about memory. It's not, it's certainly also about emotions. I would argue that in some ways it's also about personality and identity and how you see yourselves and what kind of lessons you learned from the pandemic. And I think and also what so the example I would use is um you know uh, you and I, whether it was our parents or maybe our grandparents who had experience with the Great Depression, and where how I think for me I could see signs of that once I was mature enough to get that about a real unwillingness to waste, for instance. That's where I think sometimes the you got to clean your plate mentality came from and things like that. Some of those things, which are not bad habits, by the way,
Nope.
but things that I think were sort of driven by their experience with the Depression. I sometimes think about that, like in the same context, like what impact will this have on us and moving forward and our identities? What will it have? Frankly, I think about it with my kids. They were in second and fourth grade when things started, so relatively young. And what sort of impact is that going to have, not just on their memories, but their broader identity?
Yeah. I think that that is a really interesting question. My kids were both in like a college.
Mhm.
And so the whole idea of what is college
Right.
changed
Yes.
completely.
Yep.
And I think that that will have an impact on generations to come,
Mhm.
the ways that we do that. But one of the behaviors, like I always remember my dad used to wash off tinfoil and dry it and fold it and put it back in the drawer and reuse it
Mhm.
again. And that was all like a sign to me, an unconscious behavior that he
Yep.
just did based on growing up in a time
Yep.
where there wasn't as much as there is now. And I feel like hand washing
Yeah.
is a thing that I will do for the rest of my life that I developed during the pandemic, that I think that I will do for the rest of my life. And people will be like, oh, she was alive during the coronavirus,
Right.
you know?
I mean, I think we should be clear. You did wash your hands prior to the pandemic, right? I mean,
Yeah,
that,
like every once in a while. I didn't sing happy birthday
yeah.
twice when I was
Yep.
washing them though.
That's very true. I will tell you, here's the thing that I absolutely cannot believe we went back to, and it's handshaking. I
Yes.
I'm just gonna come right out and tell you, I think it's the grossest thing human beings do. I don't understand why we shake each other's hands. I really thought we were done with that, and then nope. Yeah, happened to me multiple times today. I had to shake people's hands.
Yes.
Yeah. Why
Yes.
can't we do the elbow thing? Loved the elbow thing.
Right. Or just not at all.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
just, hey.
Yeah. Just uh, a polite nod from across the room seems like a good way to
Yes.
greet people. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Like I'm good with a let's just not shake hands. I agree. And I feel like some people don't
yeah.
still.
Yeah.
I went to a conference recently where on our name tags, you had to put like a sticker about how you would like to be greeted. Like,
Really.
I'm a hugger. I will shake your hand.
Wow.
I'm a fist bump. Don't touch me.
That's interesting because it feels like in order to greet people, you really have to find a match. Like I think like if I'm a fist bump person and I bump into and I run into a hugger, like how are we going to navigate this challenge?
It's kind of like go in for the poof.
Yeah. So okay. So okay, as we one of the things we said we were going to do, and I think we've done a little bit of this, but we were going to talk about some of our favorite memories from the pandemic that we actually want to hang on to, and then we also want to talk about some things we should remember not to repeat. So
Yes.
let's start with let's start with the thing not to repeat. Like what are the memories that you don't that we need to remember not to do again?
I think like trying to consume too much information, like
Yep.
just like protect yourself from doom scrolling.
Yeah.
I think that that is something that I did not do that
Mhm.
I wish I would have. I think my mental health would have been better during the pandemic had I not.
Right.
So that's what I want to
Yeah.
do differently.
Mine is a that is definitely a good one. Mine's a little different from that because mine is more just more a thing about the pandemic that I don't think I'll ever be able to forget because it continues to infect us. But a thing that I just, and it's the people's reliance on misinformation and how much of that we saw and how even I think like the thing about the pandemic that just exacerbated so much and made things so much worse is to me was people's willingness to believe things that weren't true or inability to sort of accept the things that probably were true while also acknowledging that scientists don't have all the answers and that there are times when it's like we think this is, I mean, that's how we started this. We thought some things were true that weren't true. um you and I erred on the side of caution, and I'm glad we did.
Mhm.
In the retrospect, were those things necessary? No. But I'm glad we did them because we did them in as precautionary. That to me is a thing that I think is important to remember in any kind of crisis, right? That we have to be careful about how we are. And it's related to what you're saying about doom scrolling. We have to be careful about how we take in information. We have to be critical of that information. We have to think about it. We also have to trust the people we should trust, and so on.
Related to that, a memory that I never want to forget is when I eventually went to a local bakery and they had Anthony Fauci cookies. And
Was that Uncle
I,
Mike's? Was it Uncle Mike's?
yes,
Nice.
yes.
Awesome.
And like the fact that a scientist had garnered like celebrity status,
Hmm. Oh no. Where'd
so
you go?
happy.
Oh, you know what? I lost you for a second. Say that last part again. Oh, I lost you again. Uh-oh.
Am I
Oh,
back yet?
yeah, you're back. Say that you were
Sorry.
talking about celebrity status.
Yep, and that the fact that I could go to a local bakery and like buy cookies with a scientist's face on it
Yeah.
just made me so happy. Um, I loved that. I loved promoting science, and I loved like doing what you were just talking about, avoiding misinformation
Mhm.
and celebrating science was something that was really great during that time that I never want to forget.
Yeah. I very much agree. I think, actually one of the things I was thinking about before when we were talking about, like, by the way, my pandemic dog showed up during
Hi,
there's Tia.
Tia.
Um but one of the things I uh, wanted to say earlier is when I was talking about kind of how I live. One of the most interesting articles I read was an interview with 5 or 6 different uh, scientists, one of whom was Fauci, talking about how they lived at various points and how they handled different points, and it was really fascinating. One of the things I remember, or at least I think I remember, from Fauci's discussion, was that I guess his daughter showed up early on. She was a school teacher, I believe, and she came into his house and went, they didn't hug or anything. She went down into the basement and she stayed down there for like 2 weeks. And they left her food on paper plates outside of the door and stuff like that, and said they were, again, to the point about erring on the side of caution, and thinking we got to be careful. And he also acknowledged he was, I believe, in his 70s, and he had to be especially careful because he was in that higher risk group. And I thought that was a really interesting just sort of take on things. Real quick,
Absolutely.
what are your favorite memories? What are the things that like you did that just jump out as being so important, or that were actually maybe some positives, the things you're nostalgic for?
Yeah, I would say definitely my nature
Yep.
access to nature and that everybody was out there walking. I loved that. And so that is, I think, my favorite memory, but I also love just like you said, playing games and like doing puzzles with my
Mhm.
kids and Uh, I'm also a huge fan of like picking up groceries, like having somebody else shop for my groceries and just opening up the trunk and having them put it
Yeah.
in there. But,
Yeah.
don't tell anyone that.
I like it.
What
Yeah.
about you?
There's a couple things, but the two that really jump out to me. One was that we decided we wanted to take a trip in the midst of all this. And so we took a trip that I actually had wanted to do since I was a kid. This is one of these that my family did before I was born and then always talked about. And so but it was we rented an RV and we drove up to Upper Michigan and we went camping for a week in a couple of different places. And it was super, super fun. We had brought all of the food we needed basically so that, if we had to go to a grocery store up there, we could. But this was, in fact, the campsites, I think, had just reopened when we went. I mean, it was, and so, but as a family, just spending 8 days sort of on the road and at different campsites and biking and hiking and playing games outside, it was a really, really fun trip. Um, the other thing is that we would have these evening, like family happy hours, essentially, that at the end of our work and school day, we would, especially once it got warmer, we would go outside, we'd have fancy drinks, we'd play yard games. I went to Menards at some point and I basically bought every yard game they had. Some of which literally lasted like 20 minutes. These are not necessarily good yard games. No offense, but they would, we would just sit outside and we would play giant Jenga or whatever and listen to music. And we streamed a couple of dance parties for people on Facebook, which was fun. And so, and one of the
Yeah.
things I like we haven't talked about yet is how, we did so much on social media that those things now they repeat every year. I get to see them. And so from a memory perspective, it's so fascinating to say, oh yeah, we made this movie, right? I don't know if you remember, we remade the trailer for the Rear Window, but with my kids looking out the back window, and every now and then it comes up, and I'm like, oh wow, I forgot we did that. Like just one weekend, it was like a fun little family art project.
Yep.
Or we remade the song from Tangled. The wait, so stuff like that was
I
lovely.
love that. Yeah, I have a Facebook memory. I took a video the first time that I went back into the office. And during this video where I'm like, oh, I'm back in the office, like back in the state. I love that.
Yeah, that is amazing. Anything else before we finish up? Wait,
Nope. I just think that we need to continue to recollect
yes.
things and talk about it. Because if we don't, I think that this research would tell us that we won't remember it, that it will get trimmed out of our memories. And I think it's important to share these with your kids, with your eventual grandkids, like generations to come. I feel like we need to share the lessons, the joys, and the sorrows of such an important time in our history, so that if it happens again, maybe we'll do it better.
Yeah. And it is worth noting. I totally and completely understand that there are people out there who would rather not remember parts of this and I've got those things too,
Mhm.
the
For
elements of
sure.
this or the aspects of this that I would like to push out of my mind for various reasons. But you're right. I mean, I think the part of being human is hanging on to some of those bad memories too, in ways that allow you to grow not just as a individual but as a society,
Mhm.
and not make the same mistakes of the past. I think that is really important. But
Absolutely.
do you have I scrolled away from the title of the article. Can you share that with people one last time?
It's called The Science of Forgetting Why We're Already Losing Our Pandemic Memories by Richard Sima.
Yes, and it's in the Washington Post.
Yes.
So I think March 13th, if I remember. Um,
Yes.
so perfect. So readers, check that out. I will post the actual article along with the episode so people can take a look. edit there. So let's see, Georgina, you are at Georgina WD in what places? Twitter and Instagram, is that right, or just Instagram?
And Facebook too.
Oh, and Facebook too. All right.
Yep.
All right. And I am at Anger Professor on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube,
LinkedIn.
and LinkedIn. We got a shout out to LinkedIn. Yeah. I don't actually know if I'm at Anger Professor on LinkedIn, but you could find me by searching for my name.
There
Yeah.
you go.
Which is, of course, where you want to connect with me, because LinkedIn is that's where I do my best work. All right. Excellent. Follow me there. And of course, you can follow at Psych and Stuff and a couple of those places as well. So thank you so much for listening, everybody. Psychology and Stuff is a production of Phoenix Studios at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. The executive producer is me, Ryan Martin, and the production manager is Rachel Scray. Our audio production coordinator is Bill Salick, and our graphic designer is Kimberly Vlies. Special thanks to our guests, that article in the Washington Post. If you haven't already, please make sure to rate, review, and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform. You can also head over to our website, uwgb.edu/podcast, to check out past episodes of this and all our shows. I'm your host, Ryan Martin, and I'm here with my co-host, Georgina Wilson-Dunges. Keep being amazing.